a small Norwegian town 1,300 kilometers from the North Pole. There are two things you are, for all practical purposes, not allowed to do. You cannot be born there, and you cannot die there. Pregnant women are flown to the mainland weeks before their due date, because the hospital has no maternity ward built for it. And if you're seriously ill, you're flown out too, because the local cemetery stopped accepting new graves in 1950 after researchers discovered that bodies buried there weren't decomposing at all. The ground was too cold to let them. Decades-old corpses, still carrying live traces of the 1918 flu virus, sat frozen and perfectly preserved just beneath the surface. A public health risk nobody had anticipated when the first graves were dug. That single, almost unbelievable fact is a decent summary of what it actually takes to live in the Arctic. This is a region where the ordinary biological facts of human life, being born, growing old, dying, staying fed, staying warm, don't just get harder. Some of them stop working entirely, and entire societies have had to build workarounds nobody else on the planet has ever needed. In Siberia, the ground itself is now waking up diseases that froze there a century ago. In Greenland, a hunting tradition older than most nations on Earth is running out of the one thing it was built on: ice cold enough to hold its own shape. And in that same Norwegian town where nobody is allowed to be born or buried, humanity has built its most important insurance policy against its own extinction. A vault holding over 1 million seed samples, buried in the one kind of cold that, for now, nothing on Earth can undo. This is the story of what it costs to build a permanent human life in a place that was never designed to hold one. Start in Svalbard, on the Norwegian archipelago floating in the Arctic Ocean roughly 1,000 kilometers north of mainland Norway, in the town of Longyearbyen, the northernmost settlement on Earth with a population large enough to be called a town at all, home to roughly 2,000 people living at 78 degrees north latitude, 60% of the surrounding land buried permanently under glacier ice. The rule about death here gets exaggerated online into something closer to myth. Headlines claiming it's simply illegal to die in Longyearbyen, which isn't quite accurate. What's true, and stranger than the myth, is this. In the 1950s, researchers examining the town's small cemetery discovered that bodies buried decades earlier, including 11 residents killed by the 1918 influenza pandemic, had not decomposed at all. The permafrost, ground that stays frozen year-round, sometimes hundreds of meters deep, had preserved them almost perfectly, and with them, traces of the actual influenza virus that killed them, still biologically intact more than 30 years later. The implications were serious enough that Longyearbyen Cemetery has not accepted a new burial since. Today, anyone who is terminally ill or facing a medical emergency serious enough that death becomes a real possibility is flown to mainland Norway, both for care the local hospital genuinely cannot provide, and, if it comes to that, for burial in ground that will actually let their body decompose the way ground is supposed to. The same permafrost that makes death complicated here has made Longyearbyen genuinely dangerous in a completely different way. Polar bears roam the terrain immediately outside town, and Norwegian law requires anyone traveling beyond the settlement boundary to carry a firearm or another approved deterrent, because in this specific corner of the planet, the local apex predator considers humans potential prey rather than a threat to avoid. University students arriving in Longyearbyen for the first time typically receive mandatory rifle safety and shooting training before setting foot outside town limits. A basic freshman orientation requirement nowhere else on Earth would think to include. The danger isn't hypothetical. In 2011, a polar bear attacked a group of campers outside town, killing a 17-year-old boy. In 2020, a bear killed a tourist at a nearby campsite. Life this far north means accepting, as an ordinary fact of daily logistics, that stepping past the edge of town can mean stepping into a food chain where you are not automatically at the top of it. And yet this same improbable town, too cold to bury its dead, too dangerous to walk unarmed beyond its own boundary, is also the site of one of the most important pieces of infrastructure humanity has ever built for its own long-term survival. Carved 400 kilometers north of the North Pole's midpoint into the flank of a sandstone mountain, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault opened in 2008 as a backup copy, essentially, of global agriculture itself. A facility designed to hold duplicate samples of crop seeds from gene banks all over the world, insulated from war, natural disaster, funding collapse, and the ordinary institutional failures that periodically destroy irreplaceable seed collections in the countries where they originated. The vault's location wasn't chosen for convenience. It was chosen specifically because the surrounding permafrost keeps the facility naturally near -4 degrees Celsius even without power, and because Svalbard sits high enough above sea level and far enough from major fault lines that engineers consider it about as geologically stable a location as exists anywhere on the planet. As of recent counts, the vault holds more than 1 million distinct seed samples, drawn from gene banks across nearly every country on Earth. It has already done exactly what it was built to do. In 2012, at the height of the Syrian civil war, staff at a major agricultural research center based in Aleppo could no longer safely maintain their own seed collection as fighting closed in around the city. They had, fortunately, already deposited duplicate samples in Svalbard years earlier. In 2015, in the first withdrawal the vault had ever processed, roughly 116,000 of those samples were shipped out of the Arctic to new research facilities in Lebanon and Morocco, allowing scientists to rebuild collections of wheat, barley, lentils, and chickpea varieties adapted over centuries, specifically to dry, difficult growing conditions. Genetic material that existed nowhere else on Earth once Aleppo's own facility became inaccessible. The seeds germinated. The collection was rebuilt, and new samples, grown from that rescued material, have since been redeposited back into the same vault, 400 kilometers from the North Pole, waiting for whatever the next crisis turns out to be. There's something worth sitting with in the fact that this exact town, where human birth and death have both, in different ways, been engineered around, is also the place humanity chose to store its backup plan for feeding itself. Longyearbyen isn't hospitable. It was never meant to be. But it turned out to be exactly the kind of inhospitable the rest of the planet needed. "1,600 kilometers to the southeast, on the other side of the Kara Sea in Arctic Russia, a completely different relationship with this same frozen ground is unfolding every year across the Yamal Peninsula. One built not around a vault, but around movement. The Nenets people have herded reindeer across this stretch of Siberian tundra for centuries. And the migration that still happens here today, twice a year, is the largest reindeer herding operation left anywhere on the planet. Entire extended families travel with herds that can number in the thousands, moving south in autumn ahead of the deepest winter cold, then back north again each spring as the snow retreats, crossing the frozen Ob River at points where the ice runs thick enough to bear the weight of thousands of migrating animals at once. Families live in conical tents called chums during the migration, dismantling and rebuilding them at each stop, carrying a way of life that has adapted, generation after generation, to a landscape with almost no permanent shelter and no fixed address at all. What makes Yamal especially fragile today isn't simply the harshness of the climate. It's what that harshness has, until recently, kept sealed underground. In the summer of 2016, an unusually intense heat wave pushed regional temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius. An almost unthinkable reading this far north. and triggered a rapid, deep thaw of ground that normally stays frozen year-round. Reindeer began dying suddenly and in large numbers, more than 2,000 animals within a matter of weeks, alongside dozens of human hospitalizations and one confirmed human death. Investigators eventually traced the outbreak to anthrax, a disease the region had not seen in 70 years, since a major outbreak in the 1940s killed enormous numbers of reindeer and left thousands of infected carcasses buried in shallow graves across the tundra, exactly the kind of burial the permafrost was, until recently, cold enough to seal permanently. As the ground thawed deeper than it had in decades, scientists believe one of those old frozen carcasses resurfaced, releasing anthrax spores that had remained dormant but fully viable for generations. The unsettling part isn't just that it happened once. It's what researchers studying the region have concluded about why. Studies published in the years following the outbreak found that Yamal's permafrost had already been thawing at an accelerating rate for at least 6 years before 2016, and that the specific, extreme summer heat that triggered the anthrax outbreak fits a pattern climate researchers expect to become more common, not less, as Arctic temperatures continue rising roughly 4 times faster than the global average. Somewhere across this same tundra, researchers estimate there are still thousands of old animal burial sites from historical anthrax outbreaks, many of them shallow, many of them sitting in ground that is thawing measurably deeper each passing decade. Nobody currently has a complete map of exactly where all of them are. For the Nenets families still making this migration today, that risk isn't an abstraction studied from a laboratory somewhere else. It's layered directly into a landscape they and their reindeer have crossed for generations. A landscape whose permanent defining characteristic, deep, reliable, undisturbed cold, is no longer something they can fully depend on. The migration hasn't stopped. Herders still cross the frozen Ob each spring, still track weather and ice conditions with the same close, generational attention their ancestors developed centuries before satellites existed to do it for them. But the ground beneath the migration route is, for the first time anyone currently alive can remember, no longer entirely trustworthy. That same erosion of trust in the ground itself, the sense that a landscape families have read and relied on for generations, is quietly changing its own rules. Shows up again, in an entirely different form, on Greenland's western coast, in the town of Ilulissat, where a tradition even older than the Yamal migration is running out of the one material it has always depended on. For well over 1,000 years, Inuit hunters across the Arctic have used dog sleds to travel across frozen sea ice in pursuit of seals, the seasonal foundation of a subsistence hunting culture built entirely around reading ice thickness, weather, and animal movement, with a precision passed down almost entirely through direct generational practice rather than written instruction. In Ilulissat specifically, that tradition produced generations of expert mushers, families whose working relationship with their dog teams stretched back further than most written records of the town itself. One of them, a 5-time Greenlandic dog sled racing champion, first went out onto the sea ice with his family's dogs at the age of 9. Decades later, in the winter of early 2026, he stood on hills above the town describing, to a visiting journalist, something he said he had never witnessed in his lifetime. No snow, and no ice in the bay at all, in the middle of what should have been the deepest part of winter. His sled, built to glide across packed snow, was bouncing over exposed rock and bare earth instead. The scale of what's changing here isn't subtle. Researchers working with Inuit hunting communities across northwest Greenland have documented that the window each year when sea ice is solid enough to safely travel across by dog sled has shrunk from roughly 5 months to as little as 3, within the working memory of hunters still active today. Interviews conducted with dozens of experienced polar bear and seal hunters across East Greenland found that the overwhelming majority had personally observed retreating glaciers, measurably warmer temperatures, and thinning, less reliable sea ice over the course of their own hunting careers, and that a growing share of hunters have already been forced to switch from dog sleds to boats, simply because the ice can no longer be trusted to hold their weight during months when it once reliably could. Rain, increasingly common in a region that historically saw almost exclusively snow through the winter, creates a particular danger of its own. Ice formed from frozen rainwater lacks the trapped air bubbles that give traditional pack ice its bright, visible white color, so it forms nearly transparent, camouflaged against the dark water beneath it, nearly invisible to a hunter scanning the surface for exactly the kind of ice that's actually safe to cross. The economic and cultural weight of that shift is difficult to overstate for communities where the sled dog population itself has, for centuries, functioned as a form of essential working infrastructure rather than simply companionship. Several years ago, Greenland's government was forced to step in with direct financial support for families in the country's far north, after the sea ice failed to freeze thick enough, in a given season, to support hunting at all. An entire community's income effectively erased by a single, unusually warm winter. Hunters interviewed across East Coast villages described the change less as an abstract climate statistic and more as a slow unraveling of something that was supposed to be permanent, passed from parent to child specifically because the ice, the cold, and the migration patterns of the animals that depend on both had always, until recently, been the one constant a hunting family could actually plan a life around. Step back from Longyearbyen's frozen cemetery, from the thawing anthrax graves scattered across the Yamal tundra, from the disappearing sea ice beneath Ilulissat's idle sled dogs, and a single uncomfortable pattern connects all three. Every one of these places built its entire relationship with permanence around the same fundamental assumption: that Arctic cold, unlike almost anything else in the natural world, could be relied upon to hold perfectly still. A cemetery that assumed frozen ground would keep its dead sealed away forever. A migration route that assumed old anthrax graves would stay frozen and inert indefinitely. A 1,000-year hunting tradition that assumed the sea would freeze solid enough every single winter to carry the weight of a family and its dogs. None of those assumptions were unreasonable. For most of human history, in this part of the world, they were simply true. They are becoming less true now, at a pace measured in single human lifetimes rather than centuries. Which means the Arctic isn't just a place that has always demanded extraordinary adaptation to survive. It's now a place where the specific adaptations that took entire cultures generations to perfect are being asked to keep working under conditions those cultures never actually experienced before. The global seed vault, buried in the one part of Svalbard's permafrost still cold enough to trust completely, stands as a strange kind of monument to exactly that uncertainty. An insurance policy built by people who understood, better than almost anyone, that even the coldest, most permanent seeming ground on the planet might eventually need a backup plan. There's a specific kind of courage running underneath everything in this story. And it isn't the dramatic, cinematic kind either. It's a Nenets family loading a chum onto a sled and crossing a river they've crossed every spring for generations, watching the ice a little more carefully than their grandparents needed to. It's a Greenlandic musher standing on bare rock in January, still hoping the snow returns before his son grows old enough to need it the way he once did. It's a small Norwegian town, built around rules no other town on Earth needs, quietly guarding over 1 million seeds against a future nobody can fully predict. None of it is about controlling the Arctic. It never was. It's about paying closer attention to it than anywhere else on the planet demands. Because up here, the cost of looking away, even for a season, has never been small. So here's the question worth carrying with you after this ends. If the coldest, most permanent feeling ground on Earth can no longer be fully trusted to hold still, what does that suggest about every other kind of permanence the rest of us have simply stopped questioning? This documentary draws on verified scientific, historical, and journalistic reporting about real Arctic locations, communities, and events, including Longyearbyen and the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, the Yamal Peninsula anthrax outbreak of 2016, and the decline of sea ice hunting traditions around Ilulissat, Greenland. No fictional characters have been introduced. All named individuals, places, and events are drawn from documented sources.